Hello and welcome to a stream about a movie that is probably not going to get made. And we're going to dive into the law behind Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and how Quentin Tarantino's films, the sort of the output of his films in terms of the amount of ideas he comes up with. Some of them get made, some of them do not. But this one, the Movie Critic, was going to be his last film, and it feels the closest to getting made out of all of his unrealized projects. We'll dive into the unrealized projects as well as we go along. Now, one of the funny things about this is I did record this, did a live stream of this a while ago. I was really happy with the content about it. However, there was problems with the settings and no one could understand anything I was saying. Well, more than usual. So I'm doing it again. I'm going to try and be a bit more concise this time, but really break down my journey with Tarantino as a director. I'm not a Tarantino super fan. I absolutely love Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I love the Rick Dalton law, all the films he's in. I might do a video on Rick Dalton as well. The character, it was interesting. The film timed with me listening to a podcast called You Must Remember This, which was all about Charles Manson and Hollywood at that time. And it's almost identical without the sort of wish fulfillment ending of Once Upon a Time. So I felt like I was immersed in this world of old Hollywood. For many people, they possibly thought it could have done with an editor or a bit more editing, but I was just happy to have more and more of it, which is why I went from the novel to getting the extended novel, which I really enjoyed, with the exception of some of the sort of dogfighting bits, which, if you know me, you know I find things like that quite difficult. I'm currently trying to watch The Hills of Eyes, and I'm struggling with the dog-related trauma in that. But going back to Tarantino, I think to just kind of put some context to this video, when Tarantino did Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, I think many young people, maybe in their teens and 20s, they were switched on to film in a different way. This guy from a video shop with a passion for film and a knowledge of film translated that into making exciting films that you hoped you could write, because you could talk. If you could talk a lot and have a kinetic mind like he did, you could get that down on paper and you could make films. And maybe put Kevin Smith alongside him in that sense as well, from Clerks, where, we're not talking about wonderful special effects and settings. We're talking about really creative, interesting, engaging dialogue. And obviously Tarantino's films did get those budgets and did go in those different directions, and Kevin Smith's films went in all kinds of weird directions. But those initial, I guess you call them those Miramax guys, in the sense of Kevin Smith and Tarantino. So definitely inspired me to write more and sort of follow a path with writing. I think Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs do stand up. I like most of his films. I don't revisit them all a lot. I do revisit Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think that might controversially, or not controversial, but might be interesting to you, that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is my favorite of his films, for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But we're going to have a look at the Movie Critic, because it does tie in very, very closely with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So we're going to look at the timeline of how it fell apart. We're going to have a look at Might It Happen Again? And we're going to have a look at some of his unrealized projects and kind of tie those things together and see how his process works. So we might not get the Movie Critic, but what will we get? Or what could we get? Or will there be a gap where we kind of forget and the anticipation isn't there? Because ultimately he wants to do that mic drop for his last film. So I'm going to start off with a quote from Tarantino. He said, "I trust myself as a writer. I trust my process." This was in 2016. So he never tries to take anything out too soon in terms of editing. If he does take things out, sometimes he finds he puts them straight back in. Now, not every film needs to be made. Not every movie should be made. So he's at peace with the idea of not every idea that he has to be on the screen. Now, it was April the 17th, 2024, where we found out that the Movie Critic was not going to be made. The project focused on a writer working on a fictional adult magazine, shall we say, in the late 70s, and it evolved from there. There was a lot of rewrites, I believe, I heard, and it sort of seemed to be taking on a life of a spin-off from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Bear in mind, it was a box office hit and made a lot of money. People were ready for a new Tarantino film, and it did very, very well. Now, the decision was seen as quite a shock because it was quite far along, and I'll explain some of that financial-wise as well. They were going to try and film at least one sequence this year and go into full production in 2025. Brad Pitt was attached. He'd heard that there hadn't been a lot of rewrites, so he was ready for the start date. And somebody in the agency said they were pushing to find out what the start date was. Now, the studio was never announced. It was believed it was going to be Sony Pictures because of the success of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The film grossed $377.4 million, which is his biggest movie money-wise, behind Django Unchained, which made $425 million, which I was quite surprised about hearing that. He had found a new compatriot, a new supporter with Sony studio chief Tom Rothman. He made all of his films with Harvey Weinstein before. You know, I think in this, I don't know. I don't know how that relationship worked. But yeah, sources say that the mood on the Sony lot isn't one of disappointment. Maybe they're not quite sure what is happening. But those who know him, and these are the reports I've read, so I'm going through my notes and all the different things that I've read. Those who know him say he has lots of scripts that he's thrown away, so people are not shocked by this. But they emphasized he is obsessed with the idea of going out on top. Therefore, legacy preserving is really important to him. So they have every intention of partnering on whatever ends up if it's not the Movie Critic. The filmmaker is described by a lot of people who know him as like a pure filmmaker. Now, I was like, what does that even mean? So I'd heard that a few times, a pure artist. In terms of them being all original stories, which is interesting, because if there's ever somebody influenced by all the films that he's watched and often directly using those things, putting them on the screen, yes, it's not like he's made Iron Man or he's making a new Police Academy movie or something. But in terms of being original IP, the only one in that list that isn't is Jackie Brown. Obviously, that's from an Elmore Leonard novel. Now, he confirmed this intention to make the Movie Critic last year. And so it was based on a guy who lived, he was really never really famous. He used to write movie reviews for an adult magazine. And it sounded as grubby as some of the ideas behind things like Kill Bill and Pulp Fiction. And people thought it would be an event picture. Now, once Brad Pitt was discussed to come back as Cliff Booth, the Movie Critic kind of morphed into something different from what people were saying. So more of a story about Cliff Booth than it had before. He'd spent 5 years writing Once Upon a Time as a novel before deciding to make it as a movie. So the novel, yeah, like I say, I've read one version of the novel and I'm working my way through the second. And there's so much richness there. If you ever listen to his podcast with Roger Avery and Gala Avery, he talks about having just pages and pages and pages, books and books and books about Rick Dalton's life. The Rick Dalton podcast, when Rick Dalton passed away, is fascinating. Going through all his filmography, interviews with him, Tarantino reading both parts of the interviews. He has gone into this world deep, very, very deep. Now, like I said, he spent 5 years doing that. So he can pivot from one thing to another deep into the process. So 5 years writing a novel and then it became a movie. Who knows what could happen next? So the film's exact story details are not known, but there's some ideas that were in there in terms of it was obviously going to be set in Hollywood, and it was going to be a goodbye to Tarantino's metaverse. So the same era as the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, 70s vibe. There was going to be like a movie within a movie. It's going to get quite meta, and it was going to include a movie theater. Well, we know he owns a movie theater, Tarantino, in Hollywood, where some of the characters could interact with each other, such as a young Tarantino, like a 16-year-old avatar for Tarantino, who worked at an usher at an adult theater when he was younger. They were thinking about getting Jules Winfield in there, but Apparently, the Movie Critic was going to shoot a short sequence in February this year, so February 2024. And the reports was that it was going to start or have a big part for Paul Walter Hauser, who's like a wrestler actor who was successful in that one film and he got lots of awards for it. He was never involved, is what he says, and people close to him say. However, people are talking that the conversations were had with John Travolta, Jamie Foxx, Margot Robbie, but that was just speculation. In fact, the only person who confirmed that they did talk about this film with him was Olivia Wilde, and they were talking about having her as the film critic, Pauline Kael, the acerbic film critic Pauline Kael. So again, that's kind of against type for Olivia Wilde, but that's quite interesting. It's interesting that she would talk about it as well, because there's been a lot about her talking about the people in her movies and people in movies talking about her as a director. And she's just like, yeah, I was talking about the Movie Critic. Nobody else seems to come out about it. The other big thing, and you'll see it in the thumbnail for this video, is that Tom Cruise was going to be in it. Now, apparently, he was the first choice for Cliff in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I'm glad he wasn't. I think it's perfect as it is. Fans were kind of wanting this to happen, but from my research, they didn't even meet about the Movie Critic. So apparently Olivia Wilde did see part of a script about, or her part with Pauline Kael in it. Another actor who I thought would have been, I heard about this, who was doing well recently. He was in Oppenheimer, but been in lots of things, a lot of the Judd Apatow things in the past. And I think he was in a Barry Levinson film that I really liked, David Krumholtz. And he was being looked at to be in this film. Well, it would be great, like, to kind of do a Travolta or a Robert Forster, or, and have a film centered around David Krumholtz. So, he is an excellent actor. Now, at this point, while these names were being mentioned, producers from Hateful Eight and Django Unchained, Stacey Sher, Victoria Thomas, who's the casting director on Hateful Eight and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in the process of coming on board, signing up to be on this. And they were making initial outreach to actors. So that might be where some of those names came from. Okay, it might be just a case of we hear about those names because those were like, I don't know if you've ever seen those lists. There's a famous one for Pulp Fiction. It's got like about 5 or 6 actors for every role, kind of crossed out, working their way through them. So they might have just had a long, so-called like a long list, not a short list. So let's go on to a little bit more into this story, because I think it's fascinating. It kind of tells you how his mind works and how Hollywood works a little bit as well, especially funding. Because one of those things that caught people off guard was the California Film Commission. They had already promised $20 million to film it in the state. So different places, like the Made in Georgia that you see sometimes and things like that, pay to have a film produced in their area, in their locale, which I think is interesting. Apparently, his production company, L Driver Productions, were given $20 million to film in the state. And the commission, if you look on their website, you can do this, it's easy. They just have a list of active projects that the commission have funded or funding. It says active project for the Movie Critic. So, interesting. It's a tax incentive program, essentially. And they, in mid-April, so around the same time it was cancelled, they've said, we've not been notified about dropping out or pulling out of anything. Interesting. So what happens next? Well, he's been talking about retiring since 2009. So he wanted to quit before he was 60. He's 61, just gone in March, and finishing on 10. Now, let's not dive too deep into unfulfilled projects just yet, because I'm going to talk about those in a moment. Now, whatever it is, it's going to have a lot of fan and media anticipation. And I think the biggest thing is the burden that's on him that he puts on himself. So I think there will be a gap now. I think it will be, he wants people to just forget while he works on it. He's got a kid now. He's more settled now. He's obviously writing novels as well. It's quite interesting. He did write the movie book, not movie criticism book, but like his journey with different films, which I got for Christmas. I've started reading that. It's quite interesting. Sounds like I am a super fan. I'm not. I do find him interesting though. I do see, and I'm sure many people my age do. Someone that you're like, he just kind of made being a fan of film and like the kind of films that just people, regular people like me and other people rented from the video shop, just watch and enjoy. Like he's like the opposite of movie snobbery and ended up being a superstar, like a megastar director. And we don't have a lot of megastar directors, really. Not since him, really, is there? I mean, there's some you can think of, like you think of that, like I guess I don't know if Edgar Wright is kind of in that realm now. People are kind of losing interest in certain ones, like Alex Garland, who was like a bit of a I watched the new Alex Garland film. So I don't know whether we've got that same thing. If you can think of somebody who's got that same level of opening a film off his name or her name to Tarantino that's around now, let me know. But no one's coming to mind at the moment. So so here's some last things that I found that he said about it, which was he wanted to leave on a mic drop, match that shit, as he said. Tell everyone, mic drop, boom. Like, what are you going to do? Top that. Which maybe the Movie Critic, a little personal film about growing up, might have been more like Fableman's kind of thing, and not like a Jaws, if we're using a Spielberg comparison. So he said he's been working on a film critic project about the year in 1970, especially in the development of New Hollywood. This is one of the last things he said about it. Am I doing it as a book? Oh, the last things he was recorded saying about it. I'm sure he said lots about it that I don't know. Am I doing it as a documentary? I'm trying to figure out what to do with it. Very, very interesting. So I have a feeling that this is done. I don't know, it'd be maybe a novel, but I think he's going to try and circle the wagons, have a think about what he wants to do for that final film. And I don't think even he knows at this point, because his mind is so kinetic. And I'm going to take you through that from the 80s right through to now about unrealized projects. And I think it will explain how his thought process works. And then it kind of tells you how this film isn't getting made, basically. Or at least I don't think it is. If it's out next week, then, great. But unlikely. So I'm going to take you right back to when he started writing things with friends. There was a film called Lovebird, or again, I'm going to call them films. Some of these were not made. Lovebirds in Bondage, and with a friend that he wrote this about a young woman with a brain injury who gets institutionalized, and then her boyfriend has to find his way into the institution so he can be with her. Tarantino was going to play the boyfriend. However, all the footage that got shot was destroyed by his friend who wrote it with him and who actually passed away. So that's kind of lost for good. The next one was before Reservoir Dogs, my best friend's birthday. He helped write a script with someone called Craig Hamann. He wrote about 40 pages. Tarantino added another 40. They got $5,000 together, and they shot 70 minutes. And it took 4 years. And sadly, a lot of it was burnt in a lab fire during editing. 36 minutes remains. There is a book about it, and apparently they're not sure how true it is about that fire, whether it just disappeared or lost or thrown away. 36 minutes of it was edited together. I think you can find it online if you just type in my best friend's birthday, Tarantino, you can find it. So I would say that counts as an unrealized idea. But this is where, once he meets Roger Avery and people like that, that's when we really start talking about having lots of ideas and not all of them stick. So working at Video Archives Video Shop with Roger Avery, they co-wrote a film called The Open Road, similar to Martin Scorsese's After Hours, a businessman picking up hitchhiker. It was changed title to Pandemonium Reigns, with a boxer was being one of the people that they picked up. Very, very similar backstory to Butch Coolidge from Pulp Fiction. It became a 500-page screenplay with Tarantino. Then they added a call girl named Alabama and a guy named Clarence to it. So Mickey and Mallory are in there. It gets very like he's just throwing all his ideas at this one script. They couldn't figure out how to end it. It was 500 pages, massive. So they deconstructed it, and that's how we got True Romance, Natural Born Killers, even aspects of Killing Zoe, Roger Avary's film, and Pulp Fiction. In the 1990s, after Reservoir Dogs, he was contemplating, and this, bearing in mind, this is when it was really tough to make comic book movies, and there didn't seem to be an interest in them. We're talking the sort of really rubbish rights holding on to films of like the Fantastic Four film and things like that. So he wanted to get the rights to Luke Cage. He wanted Lawrence Fishburne as Cage. He liked the idea, but then he shifted his interest to Pulp Fiction. The next idea he had was being attached to The Man from U.N.C.L.E. You can see this fight between wanting to do his own things, but also, oh man, I loved that when I was a kid. I love watching that film. I love watching that show. I love reading that comic. I would love to make the film of it. Then he wanted to make a remake of The Psychic, the Seven Notes in Black, Lucio Fulci's film. And he wanted Bridget Fonda. And this was around the time of Jackie Brown in it. At the moment, it was, well, not the moment, at the time, it was very difficult to kind of get the conversation going with the owners of it. And in 2019, it was still going, like there was still people saying, oh, in Italy saying, oh, it might happen. But bearing in mind, we've gone from the 1990s to 2019, so probably won't. The next one, he was going to adapt The Killer Inside Me with Uma Thurman. And the film actually was made in 2010 by Michael Winterbottom, nothing to do with Tarantino. So he wanted Brad Pitt in that, and Juliette Lewis. Bear in mind, you have to go back to a lot of these people he's used in other films or met in other films, and he wants to get them on board. Then Silver Surfer, still in the comic book era, when comic books were seen as quite an unusual thing to want to make into movies. We're still talking in the 90s, the same with Green Lantern, Iron Man. Then, well, we fast forward to Inglourious Basterds time, people started talking about the Vega Brothers film, Double V Vega, wanting Michael Madsen as Vic Vega and John Travolta as Vincent Vega. But due to the characters dying in the films, he couldn't quite make it work. And also the ages of them, if it was going to be a prequel and things like that. He said it seems kind of unlikely. Last time he spoke about that was 2007. Moving into the 2000s, Tarantino was rumored to be developing another Elmore Leonard novel, 40 Lashes Less One, which sounds like a great giallo title. He had 20 pages of the screenplay written by 2015. He still owns the right to adapt the book and maybe might become a miniseries. I kind of hope he doesn't do TV, not because I think there's anything wrong with that, but I just like the idea of him existing as a filmmaker, maybe novelist too. Kill Bill sequels were discussed in 2004. In 2004, he was planning a sequel because he started thinking about it like the Dollars trilogy, like the idea of Beatrix, the bride's daughter, and she'll get all of the money of Bill that belongs to Bill, and yeah, he's talking about it. He wants to kind of because he was saying about their age being right for the child has grown up, but he wanted to then he started thinking, oh, what we're going to add more kung fu things to it, and discussed it all the way through 2012. Then the last thing he said was, we'll see, probably not. He'd spoken to Uma Thurman, and he's saying that she said it was an interesting idea. It was on the cards 20 years after the following one. Beatrix Kiddo and her daughter Bibi are forced to go on the run after a period of peace. He liked the idea of casting Maya Hawke in there because she'd worked in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I thought she was good in Stranger Things as well. So yeah, like the basically the next generation. Then he started thinking about origin stories of the bride. But by 2021, he stated none of them came to fruition because of the fatigue he had. The idea of the fatigue of making the first two didn't feel like he wanted to go through that again. Fair enough. Then a few untitled kung fu films inspired by House of Flying Daggers. He wanted to use out of sync English language dubbing. That was interesting. Get Motor Jones from Police Academy to do that. Fight me. And he was attached briefly or interested in doing Casino Royale. Obviously, Martin Campbell ended up doing that fantastic film. James Bond. Then this is one I kind of wish was made, because there was some pretty bad mid 2000s, 2010s disaster films that were made, like with The Rock and people like that. But I would have loved to have seen Tarantino's take on those amazing Poseidon Adventure, Airport 77, 78, Towering Inferno style disaster films. I'd have loved to have seen Tarantino take one of those on. There's a real space for those, I think, and I love those. I love all the Poseidon Adventure films. Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, Towering Inferno is great. Earthquake, all the airport ones, so good. And in the airport one, this was really cool. He was going to have Travolta as the pilot, Pam Grier the stewardess, Robert Foster, Michael Madsen, Tim Roth, Harvey Keitel, Bridget Fonda, the whole crew in there in an airport film. So good. Yeah, really good. I guess the closest we'll get to something like that's like Die Hard 2. Is it Red Eye as well? That's not too bad with Cillian Murphy. So then we talk around 2007. So we're getting closer to the modern day, I guess. Grindhouse sequel, Kung Fu, still in his Kung Fu phase. And obviously they discussed about the Thanksgiving being in there. And it ended up being a movie anyway. I actually quite enjoyed Thanksgiving. Well, I don't know what your thoughts are on Thanksgiving, but I quite liked it. And the Westworld remake, well, obviously we know that got made into a series. I don't think we need another Westworld project, really. He was being forced to, if he was going to do it, he was being forced to use Schwarzenegger in that. Back to Way. Sergeant Rock, the DC Comics character. I looked into Sergeant Rock. I'm unfamiliar with it. Kind of like an old-fashioned kind of rogue trooper kind of feel to it, a DC Comics character. He thought he could do a good job on that, and he was discussing that in 2021, but doubted it and said he thinks about it from time to time. The Faster Pussycat Kill remake, he talked about that in 2008. Jumping around, this is interesting because it really is 2008. Kim Kardashian, Eva Mendes, Britney Spears, Tara Patrick in there. And one of the original actresses, Tura Satana, was working with him to work on the script, but nothing came of that. I'm not a massive fan of Russ Meyer. Yeah, not for me, but I'm sure I can understand why it's important in that kind of, because Tarantino loves that exploitation style film. Then he was going to do, which I thought was really cool, almost like the Helm, Dean Martin take on the spy films. Kind of like James Bond, but not got the energy to do like the big action stuff. So he wanted to do a trilogy of novels, the films based on the novel by Len Dayton, fictional spy Bernard Samson, where Berlin game, Mexico set, and London match. And he wanted to stay in London for 6 to 9 months, film most of them around there. People like Simon Pegg, Kate Winslet, Michael Caine. He's a pain. Michael Caine and Anthony Hopkins. That would have been cool. I quite like the idea of that. Then the other one was he was getting into his history area, been doing some reading, wanted to do a biopic, or biopic as we used to call them, about the American history hero John Brown, basically starting the road to end slavery. And that's interesting. I guess some of those, or certainly some of the passion and feelings behind that, probably went into Django. And 1930s gangster film was talked about in 2009. That would have been good. But then again, around that time, there was quite a few of those called American Public Enemies, and things like that, and Road to Perdition. Screwball romantic comedy. Maybe that'd be something like like a Down with Love kind of thing. I don't know. Doesn't feel like something I would want to see of his. A medieval film, wanting Helen Mirren as a foul-mouthed monarch. And she'd already played the Queen around that time as Queen Elizabeth II and wanted to do it again. Less Than Zero remake. Now, I like Bret Easton Ellis, and I've read, I like Glamorama. That's a good book. American Psycho is, I think, I don't know if this is a controversial take, but I think it's better as a film than as a book. The book's okay. It kind of certainly edgelord me at the time, loved it. But Less Than Zero, I could not connect with that book in any way, shape, or form. The film is blah. So if he was going to have a go at Less Than Zero, that doesn't get me too excited. Sort of rich kids with rich problems and taking lots of drugs. I don't know. But then it probably would have been better if Tarantino made it. Who knows? Then he wanted to do a children's film. Obviously, it's something like a Mighty Ducks, because he was thinking about working in video archives and the amount of kids' films he rented out to people. Again, his ideas are so, synapses flying. A Django Inglorious Bastards trilogy ender called Killer Crow, about very, very similar. This is going to be very, very similar, I think, to the film with the Spike Lee film. I think it was a Spike Lee adjacent film with the three gentlemen who went to Vietnam, and their kind of relationship all fell apart. I can't quite remember the name of it, but yeah, it sounds a bit like that. Kind of crossed with a Dirty Dozen. Although Rain was going to come back. Another Django film was discussed, Django in White Hell, but then that was rewritten as The Hateful Eight. Sci-fi film, he wanted to do like It Follows, essentially, but in space, inspired by The Thing, Halloween, Stalker, Sarkovsky film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, slasher sci-fi. But then he said he wrote it out and it felt too wordy for horror. So I think that'd be interesting. A Django and Zorro combination in 2015. The Star Trek one was talked about a lot. I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail. He was going to direct it, and J.J. Abrams was going to produce. There was going to be a writer's room of 4 or 5 people, including Drew Pearce, who wrote Iron Man 3, Hobbs and Shaw. Yikes. So yeah, he wanted to kind of do it as sort of a smaller budget version of it, revolving around Captain Kirk, going back into. Do you remember that episode of Star Trek where they go down to Earth, or a sort of parallel Earth, and they're like gangsters? So maybe that's his way of getting this gangster film made, was to have like, because I just remember Nimoy in the zoot suit. Then after Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he wanted to make a Bounty Law TV miniseries. 2020s, moving into 2021, he was interested in adapting the First Blood novel. Now, I think if you separate First Blood from the rest of the Rambo films, it's an incredible film, a really, really powerful film. And it stands alone. I don't know. I think he wanted to kind of do he'd seen The Fighter, David O. Russell's The Fighter. He wanted to make his First Blood like kind of similar in that scale. I'm glad he didn't. You can't top that one. And then he said, I only want to direct one more film, so it wasn't going to be that one. Rick Dalton's work in the real-world TV series Lancer. He wanted that to be a Robert Rodriguez movie, though. The Cliff Booth project, about Cliff Booth in the POW camp. Spaghetti Western called Snake Belly. He was going to direct the TV series Justified. Now, I'm more of a Deadwood fan. I like Timothy Olyphant. I like him a lot, actually. He's a great actor. He's good in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood as well, and Go. But he was going to direct a couple of episodes. Justified did not. Then we're on to the Movie Critic. Okay, that was going to be, like I say, in 1977. If the writer's strike hadn't happened, maybe he'd have pushed through and done it. Who knows? That's something to leave. So there's a few other projects there in terms of like Kill Bill video games, stage plays, extended cut of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which you can get on most of the DVDs. Stage productions of different things like Reservoir Dogs. That would be interesting. If it's a musical, cutting off the year. Western novels he's been writing. The films of Rick Dalton, a career book. Now, this is really weird because literally the moment I came out of that cinema, and then when I listened to the podcast as well, I started writing down and searching all of the names of the films, and I was looking into if I could make really great movie posters, I would do like a movie poster video of every Rick Dalton film. But I think he's going to make that book, which sounds awesome. The Fireman and all those kind of things, and other novelizations. But that takes us completely up to date. So, questions. Do you think the Movie Critic will get made? Personally, I don't. If it doesn't, what would you like to see Tarantino's last film be? What's your relationship with Tarantino? How do you find it? Do you enjoy all his films, some of his films? Do you revisit them? I don't revisit them a lot. But I would heartily recommend the novelization of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. If you want free, fun Tarantino, get on the Video Archives podcast, listen to the Rick Dalton episodes, the interviews, the filmography. It's like listening to another film. If you can put up with most of it being Tarantino talking even faster than I talk. So that was the Movie Critic 20 something, the story behind the best Tarantino movie you will never see. I'm Ron Burgundy. So yeah, thanks for watching. And yeah, if you'd like to like this and all that good stuff, that would be wonderful. I love talking about movies with you. I love hearing what you think about them. More importantly, there's so many people who write really detailed and thoughtful comments on the videos, and I really do appreciate it. And yes, there'll be more horror coming, but often, a bit like our friend Tarantino, can't limit myself to just one thing. So if I see something that I think is cool, or I want to talk about it and make a video about it, I'll do so. If there's something you see that's cool that you think I might like, comment, send me a message, and yeah, it'd be great. All right, guys, thank you very much. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate it. Have a great evening, morning, afternoon, and hey, let's be careful out there, in the words of Hill Street Blues. Flub that at the end as well.